Welcome to Restore, a podcast seeking to restore the vision, restore the mission, restore the church. And now your host, Javier Diaz.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Restore podcast, a podcast seeking to help restore the vision, restore the mission, restore the church to what God would have it to be through His grace. This is episode 99. My name is Javier, and I'm your host. Before I tell you about my guest for this episode, it's hard and just incredible for me to believe that my next episode will be number 100. And we also just celebrated last month, February, 8 years of this monthly podcast called Restore. I'll have more to say about my journey in the next episode, of course, episode 100. But for now, just once again, thank you. Thank you to everyone from all over the world or from many, many different places across the world for subscribing, listening, and sharing the Restore podcast. It truly has been a blessing for me to be able to do this for so long and bring these conversations that I pray will be helpful, hopeful to you in your journey of faith, and perhaps some even challenging to you, to us as well. Again, I'll have more to say in episode 100. On today's episode, I'm so happy to share with you my conversation with my friend, Rich Aguilera. I know I say this often, and I'll say it here for sure. Again, this is a conversation you will be blessed and challenged by. But along with that, I encourage you to share this episode with everyone you know, but for sure with every parent you know. Along that note, make sure to check out the show notes as they have all the links related to Rich's amazing children's content. So let me tell you a little bit about him. Rich Aguilera loves to travel and explore the world, doing events, recording content, and going on mission trips. He's currently visited 97 countries. Rich is also known as the Mud Guy and has been writing for Guide magazine for years. He's also the author of a dozen books, including 21 Tools to Teach Kids About Jesus, Firewalkers, Ridiculously Amazing Nature, and Around the World with 80 Family Devotionals, and has produced popular television programs such as Kids Time, The Big Three, Bible Treasures, and The Creation Case. Rich also wrote and produced the award-winning feature film, The Mysterious Note, and recently released his newest movie, The Secret of the Fossil. Rich also has a popular radio show heard in more than 75 countries called God's Great Earth. Over the last 8 years, Rich has been touring his live stage show, Dinosaur Encounter, having done events in over 150 cities. His parent ministry is called One Mustard Seed, which states as its mission, it's pretty simple. We love to point kids and families to Jesus. Rich lives in Michigan and is married and has 2 teenage sons. Again, make sure to check out his main site, onemustardseed.com, and all the other links that are on the show notes for this episode. And lastly, though we talk about it in our conversation, I want to encourage you and your church, wherever you may be listening, to go to AdventistMovies.com and sign up to watch and show his latest movie, The Secret of the Fossil, at your church. With all that said, let's jump into my conversation with one of the most passionate people I know who's done so much for kids ministries, Rich Aguilera. Richard Aguilera, welcome to the Restore podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. Rich, I've been wanting to have you for some time on the podcast. And for those that may not know, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, that Rich and I have known each other for quite some time. And we'll get into all those specifics. But I will just say that many, many moons ago, he came up to me, and he's laughing already. He came up to me and he just asked me out of the blue. I was in seminary, and he said, "Hey, I believe God is calling you to help me with children's ministry." I'll never forget it. We were in the church there, the Spanish church in Berrien Springs, Michigan. And out of the blue, he just comes and tells me this and asks me to help him. And so that began our friendship. I, crazy enough, said yes, though I had never worked with children's ministry. It was such a blessing. And I learned so much, not only from you, Rich, but just obviously from doing it as well. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So again, I'd say all that to premise just to say thank you for coming on. And I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And it's always fun to have podcasts with people that you've known for a long time because there's this friendship that's existing there already. So I'm really looking forward to the time together too, man.
Thank you, man. So with that said, I'm going to jump right in and ask you, as I normally do, Rich, tell us about your faith journey and how you ended up doing what you're doing now in your life and in this incredible ministry.
Yeah, boy, talk about didn't see that coming type of story. So I hate to date myself, but back in the late 80s, when I was entering university, I was trying to figure out what to do. I'm a PK. My brother's a pastor. My father-in-law is a pastor. So I've been surrounded by pastors forever. And I felt a calling to serve at church somehow, but pastoring just kind of wasn't the calling that I was feeling because I would see myself as more of a creative. But back then, there just was not that many creative options. So I ended up picking architecture. And that's what I went to Andrews University to study. I did architecture. It's a 5-year program. Did a year abroad in Europe, which was also a transformative year. And then started working in architecture and did that for 16 years. But during that time, it's kind of funny because I discovered that architecture, although it does have some creative moments, I found out that it was more of just this business of building things. And it was more of just constantly just fighting with somebody or, building inspectors and contractors and, your clients and, just, it was always somebody. And it was just, we'd spend literally 90% of our time, getting the thing built and a tiny little fraction of time getting to be creative. So pretty early on, I figured this out and I was a little frustrated. So I was like, oh man, well, I gotta get my creative thrills somewhere. So, I born and raised in the church and always had that passion of being in church and serving at church. So that's what I did. I got involved at church first as the youth director at our church, as you mentioned earlier, the Berrien Springs Spanish Church in Berrien Springs, Michigan, right outside of Andrews. And I did that as a youth director for, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years. It was a neat time because I was able to put a lot of energy and time into building our youth programs. And we had these amazing, super creative, music and skits and all this kind of stuff. I mean, we'd actually even have more people show up Sabbath afternoon to our AY programs. We called them Escape at the time. Than we would have come for the morning worship. So it was just a fun thing to work on. And that was kind of my beginning of working directly in a church type setting using, maximum creativity. I mean, I pulled out all the stops. We were shooting video, which at that time was really, you're pulling out the little tiny retro camera and, there was no editing. It was like literally record and stop and then record and stop. And there was no way to, actually post produce or do anything like that. But we had fun doing all sorts of creative stuff. And from there, fast forward another 8 or 10 years, we start having our own family. And so the attention kind of starts shifting a little bit to a younger audience.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because you mentioned that, first time you were working in children's ministries, I was the same. I was clueless when it comes to children's ministries, but suddenly you're a parent and then we're like, oh man, okay. So our family shift, my sister-in-laws and my brother-in-laws, and we all just, our whole shift became really more to serve our kids and then serve children. And it just kind of blew up from there. We started doing children's church. We started getting involved in the VBS. And it's kind of funny because children's church was born from our VBS work in the summer. Because it's funny, a lot of people, you've probably heard this conversation where you do VBS and then you have this amazing week with 100 kids came out.
Right.
And then at the end of the week, it's like, all right, thanks for coming. See you next year. And we're like, wait a second, this is not right. Yeah. How could we be having this amazing spiritual encounter for a week with all these children from our community? And then we tell them basically, see you next year.
Right.
And that was kind of the beginning of our children's church ministry, which was really the first really big children's related ministry work we did. And the premise was whatever we did for VBS, we would kind of continue it once a month in a children's church. We would do it Sabbath afternoon, just this kind of really exciting time. We started doing it in the morning, and then we pivoted to doing it in the afternoon because it started growing so much.
Right.
And that's kind of funny because that's kind of where you came into the story.
Yeah.
Early on, we were constantly looking for talent and looking for people that were young and energetic and looked like they were sharp. And I don't know, man, I saw you there and I got to meet you and I was like, oh man, this guy looks sharp. This guy looks talented.
Mercy.
I think he'd be great for this.
I think you had pity on me and you probably said, poor guy. He seems like he needs to do something. So, but thank you for all that.
Yeah. And so for all your listeners, basically, if I'm not mistaken, the children's church that we were doing at that time was our, it was our cowboy set.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we cast you as Sheriff Javi.
That's right. Yeah. There's some pictures there. This is only audio, but yeah, if some people may still remember some of those pictures. And we just on a side note here, I'm going to jump in. We still want to hear the rest of that story, but just to put a little pin here, that part where you mentioned where we invited and the kids of the church, right, went to this big VBS for 1 week or 4 or 5 days, right? And then they would go back to their churches, particularly in the environment there in Berrien Springs. When you were doing these VBSs or these type of VBSs once a month, as you said, at one point you were having, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, hundreds of kids coming in as well, not only from the community, but from other churches that wanted to come because they saw, the parents saw, wait a minute, this is something that's really blessing my children. And they were, for that time, they were incredible. Clearly your giftings and architectural were being used. So maybe unpack that just a little bit more, because these weren't just, you went all in. I had, dressed as a cowboy and had some makeup on and all that kind of stuff. Yes, people go makeup. Yes. Everything. You and your crew went 100% in. So maybe unpack that just a bit more to let those listening see how big these things were, and that perhaps they can also do it for themselves, because, it was once a month for basically the semester that we were there. I think sometimes you rested in the summer and then went back in the fall. But unpack that for us a bit. Yeah,
early on, we started doing it every single month of the year, but we figured out pretty quick after the first year or so that we would get burnout if we did it every single month. So then we pivoted to just doing it during the school year. So we'd do VBS in the summer, but then either late August or beginning of September, we'd restart and have this program. Like I mentioned, we had started first Sabbath during church, but it grew so quickly that we moved to doing it Sabbath afternoon because lots of other people from other churches, from the community, kids would bring their friends from public school, just regular community kids that had never been in church, as well as kids from other churches as well, started coming and getting interested. And we were pretty intentional about making it a very interactive, very fun, very creative time. My children's ministries philosophy, no secret, is that my approach to connecting with kids, reaching kids, teaching kids, is that first you have to build a connection. And you have to use some sort of tool to do that. In my experience, I love creativity. I love humor. I love engagement, so they get to participate. So we would use all those kind of tools to engage our kids in a program, in an event. And then once you have that connection, once you have their attention, that's when teaching can happen. And unfortunately, a lot of times I see a lot of children's ministries leaders, unfortunately, doing it backwards, where their first encounter is right away. They're trying to teach them and try to help them understand something. But if you don't have trust, if you don't have a connection, a friendship, some bridge that you have built already, it becomes a lot harder. So I've always believed in that concept. And so that's what we would do. We would just have a ton of fun. It was super engaging. It was funny. We had just really corny puppets and they were just really super silly. And we would, set up this really fun time. And then when we had that engagement is when we could really dive in and teach and connect with the kids. And this format really, really worked well for us. And it just kind of grew and grew. And like you said, we were, in the glory years, we were having, a couple hundred kids come out. And the cool thing about this is not only was it that we had kids, but we had our high schoolers, our local high schoolers were the ones that we would actually start training and bringing in to actually do the majority of the work.
Mm.
They were doing the puppets. They were doing the live band. They were doing, the reception and the snacks and the whole thing. And then it was just this core group of adult leaders that were just kind of, behind the scenes, making sure everything worked and writing the scripts and all that stuff. So it just really, towards the end, just blew up to this big thing. I mean, we even were getting our middle school. We would bring them on as we called them junior staff, and we would give them kind of beginner jobs to do, not the heavy lifting, like, being up front and singing and being puppets, but they would be our ushers and, servers and do little things like that, getting kids to their seats and to their assigned crew member. And it was really an amazing thing, because we were having kids from 3 years old to 10. Then our 10 to 14s were our junior staff. And then all the high schoolers and some college kids were actually doing all the work. And then maybe another 10 adults that were, like I said, behind the scenes running everything. And it was just this huge, huge thing. And we would switch our theme twice a year.
Yeah.
So like you said, when you were doing it, you were a cowboy. Other years we were at a train station. Other years we were cavers. Other years we were on a steamship with a captain. And other years we had built this science lab with a time machine. And so we just kind of, again, being super creative and trying to do fun things that kids get engaged and get excited about.
Yeah. I was the cowboy, and then I was the engine conductor. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Right, with the overalls and
that's right.
Yeah,
the engineer's
the oil
hat
in my face and things like that. Which again, not only were you very creative using your skills now in the local church as you were, the skills of architecture and your creativity, but also I love what you just said there, and I think we need to pause on that you empowered not only the young kids that were coming, but you empowered the young adult kids. You empowered the juniors and teenagers as well to join and be part of this. And they loved it. I mean, they just absolutely, of what I saw, of what I remember, right? And just as a pastor in the local church, when I was in the local church, just knowing that and seeing that, again, all of this was back then a reminder. So I'm really thankful to you, Rich, because I think God used that in my life just as a reminder of the power of children's ministry as a whole, not only for the children, but as you were mentioning there, to get other teenagers, juniors, young adults involved in this. And it just adds this whole team and empowerment and mentoring as we go along, of helping one another to grow closer to Jesus and get to know Jesus for some. And that leads me to that intentionality, right? You were very intentional, and you wrote most of this stuff. So as much as we as a community of faith have a lot of resources for VBS and things like this, but a lot of this, you wrote everything. I mean, from the scripts that I sometimes ad-libbed just a bit, right? And you're smiling now, which you wanted us to do that, but to everything that was done, you did right. Is that correct?
That's right. So the first year we had trying to figure out what to do, and we actually found this children's church curriculum that Advent Source sold. So we grabbed that and we did that. And then the second year we called up Advent Source and we're like, hey, we need another one. And they're like, no, we don't have any more. That was it, just one. So me and my brother-in-law, we were the main writers, and we're like, hey, you want to just start writing this? And he's also super, super creative, super funny guy. So we're like, all right, let's us do it. So for the next, like I said, decade or two here, we just started writing all these programs out ourselves.
So how did you go from there to do it in the local church in Berrien Springs? Now many people know you in many different ways, right? They know you from the dinosaur encounter. We'll talk more about that, of course. They know you from the mud guy, or perhaps other avenues of your ministry. So tell us how you went from there to all these other aspects in which you are involved and minister to as well.
All right. So I don't tell this story too much, but I'm happy to share it here with your listeners. But during all this time, I was still doing my architecture job. I had my career, and that's what was paying the bills. And then I would get my creative and my spiritual thrills, if you can say that, at church and with the kids, and doing all these and empowering the kids and bringing them up. And I should add, you had kind of teased on it a minute ago that a huge part of ministering to kids is that giving them ownership, which is oftentimes lacks in a lot of church environments I see, where we just teach the kids. You have to take them to the next level as early as possible. Get them involved, give them ownership, give them roles, give them responsibilities. Yeah, they don't have to have incredibly huge responsibilities. Give them some sort of title, give them something that they are responsible for that they can do. And it is mind blowing what will happen when you fast forward, because it's funny, just to kind of expand a tiny bit on those children's church kids. Since we did it for so long, we got to actually literally see these kids grow up. Wow. And it's amazing, because then I was a Sabbath school teacher. I've been a Sabbath school teacher now for 30 plus years in a row for kids. And it's funny because you can see these kids growing up, and now they're, involved at church. They're the leaders. They've got their families there. And there's this one picture that I found a couple of years ago with all of our teenage Sabbath school kids. And I was with some of the other teachers, and we're like, looking at the kids and talking about where they were. And we made this very interesting realization that of our 17 or 18 kids that were in that picture, sadly, one of them had died. One of them had dropped out of the church, but the other 16 were still extremely involved and active members at the church. And I was just like, holy cow, wait a second. You read about these Barna studies or whatever about, 70% of the youth or whatever leaving the church after a certain age. And I'm like, wait a second, how in the world did we get 90% retention? Because fast forward to even today, I see these kids still, which of course they're not kids anymore. Some of them have their own kids already. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, and I asked myself, and I'm trying to backtrack, and I wish I had more scientific evidence to present, but I asked myself, what did we do differently that we didn't lose 70% of our kids at our church during this time period? And the only thing that I can attribute that to is that level of investment of time, of them being involved, of giving them ownership, of giving them roles, and having them being a super integral part of the church. And I'd like to think that did have a major part of what happened to them.
Absolutely, 100%. Again, it's just good to reemphasize this again and again, just the power of involving, empowering, and mentoring kids, not only teenagers, but those in the junior age level, and of course, bringing in the young adults. And it just, we see this too as pastors, right? I mean, it's overall. And I think you and I are speaking from experience, as me as a pastor and you also doing it, ministering for 30 years specifically in this lane, seeing it as you have just been mentioning, the fact that having done that, the grand majority of these kids that are now adults and have their kids, they're still in church, and now they're doing the same thing because they saw you do it. So you've been a blessing to so many, along with myself. And so we praise God for that. And so as you move now and you expand, tell us more about how this expanded and how you ended up doing this now full time for some time, and some of the other venues that you began doing and continue to do.
So the interesting thing about living in Berrien Springs here at Andrews University is, while we were doing all this stuff, the thing about Andrews University is that, as you can imagine, tons of people come and go,
right?
Literally from all over the world, which is extremely fascinating because you get to meet so many amazing people and super talented people, super creative people, pastors, and just pastors' wives that are super involved in children's ministries. I mean, everything. But the interesting thing about that is they come in, and when they discover that we're doing something that's kind of radical, kind of, big and over the top, and then they see the results, what we would get a lot is people coming up to us, the leaders, and saying, wow, I've never seen this before. This is incredible. And you got like 300, 200 kids in here, and you got all these people involved, and look at the creativity, and look how much fun they're having, and whatever. And I would get people over and over and over coming up to me and telling me, Rich, this is amazing. You need to share this with people. Other people need to know what you're doing. And I'm like, this is it. This is my little world. We're just doing what we can at our local church. I got my job, I got my career, and I just totally blew it off. Like, thanks for the nice words and whatever, but completely didn't think about it. But it just kept happening over and over. Rich, you really need to share this. Rich, the church desperately needs to kind of see that this can happen, that this kind of work and it can actually exist and learn and whatever. You need to share what you do, and we need your creativity at the church level, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I still kept resisting until I kind of came to this interesting realization that I'm like, all right, wait a second here. Is God trying to tell me something? And I was like, nah. And then I was like, and then it happened again. I was like, because this was like a years long process of people coming up to me. And I was like, nah. And I remember finally getting to this point. I think it was 2006. And I was like, all right, God, I think you're trying to make a point here. I'm committed to the church and committed to serving and the kids and the whole thing. And I was finally like, all right, God, if you're trying to tell me something, I'm willing to listen. And here's a deal. I'm going to make a deal with you. Is that you open the doors of what you want me to do, make it nice and clear, and I'll walk through the door. That was my prayer. And nothing happened for a few years. And I just kept doing my thing. And then, people kept mentioning the thing, and I'm like, okay, whatever. Until a few years later, if God finally showed up again.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because, long set of circumstances, but in my work in architecture, it came to a point where I had this kind of a Gideon moment, you can call it, with a fleece. And God made it very clear at that time that he wanted me to stop doing architecture and that he wanted me to start doing full-time ministry work. And it was a bit shocking. We were going through this interesting time because at that time I was custom building homes for clients. So people that want a second or third home, they want a custom built home. I had gotten my architecture or builder's license, my real estate license. So I was doing a kind of a full service thing. Yeah. And when you're doing that, you can only really do, at least for me, I was only doing about 3 houses a year, custom built houses. And I always had houses at 3 different stages. I was always building one. I was always in design development on one. And then I was always with a contract, getting ready to sign or start another house. Just kind of spread them out so that I can handle and manage all 3 stages. And it's kind of funny because in this very bizarre 2-week period, I finished a house. The house that we had a signed contract with already, we were about to start. Those people suddenly called me, and it'd be hilarious if those people are listening right now, but those people called me and they said, "Oh, Rich, man, you have done so much work here for the last 6 months doing the design and the building, the permits, getting the contract ready. The bank was on board. Everything was ready and set." And all of a sudden, the bank calls up these people and something went wrong and they pulled the plug on the project. And they're like, "Rich, we can't build." And I was like, wow, okay. And then the other project, which is the ones that I was in early design development, everything was going great. We had design down, we had plans down. We hadn't signed a contract yet, but usually when I was this far along, it was 100% done deal. And this is like a week later, these people called me up and they're like, "Oh, Rich, we've been working on this here for two months or something, the design. We're so happy how everything's turned out." But it turns out that the husband suddenly got transferred his job to another part of the country. And they're like, "Oh man, sorry, we've got to pull out. We can't do this." And so literally in a 2-week period, I went from having my normal 3 projects going at the same time to actually having 0 going at the same time. And then here's the great part. 2 days later, I have a friend from across the country that has no idea about my walk, about my journey, about nothing that I'm doing. He knows that I'm involved in children's ministries and active and whatever. He calls me up and says, "Rich, I'm not sure why I'm calling you, but I'm just here to tell you that now is the time for you to start your ministry."
Wow.
And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know why. I just felt compelled to call you right now and tells you that now is when you are supposed to start your ministry." And I was just like, "What?" And it's true, because it was this just massive lull in my career, still super, super involved, peaking in our children's ministries work or whatever, because at that point we were also starting to produce video and other things. And then he says, and if you don't know what to do, I also have a suggestion of what you need to do first. because, my first reaction to him was like, what am I supposed to do? All I do is this kind of volunteer thing at church. How am I supposed to make a ministry start? And he simply said, you need to be at the next ASI, which was in Tampa Bay, that summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, ASI, this convention for Adventist servicemen and ministries and business, whatever. And I'd never been to that. I had heard about it. I didn't know what that was. He's like, you need to go there. You need to have a booth. I was like, okay. And he's like, and if you don't have any money, I'll pay for it. So I was like, okay, all right. So literally, it was like 3 months later, I'm at ASI, got my booth. I'm literally standing there with nothing. I felt kind of silly because I have really nothing to sell and nothing to tell. I showed up with my trademark hat because, a lot of people remember me with my hat, my Jeep and the whole thing. And that was this kind of persona that a lot of people, know me by. And that's who I was. I literally was cruising around with my hat all the time and my Jeep all the time. And a lot of the work that I did was kind of this adventure guy. So I showed up in Tampa there at the ASI with my hat, and I was just sitting there in a booth, just talking to people. And interestingly, first day that I'm there, I'm standing in the lunch line, which these monstrous lines. Literally, you'd be standing there for 45 minutes waiting to eat. And it turns out that the person behind me in line was Randy Fischel, which is and still is the current editor of Guide Magazine. And we started talking and what he's doing and what I'm doing. And I don't know, something impressed him. By the time we made it to lunch and had finished eating, he had asked me to become their new nature columnist for their magazine and to be writing a 4-page column every month, which I did for the longest time. And that was literally one of the very, very first kind of wider things that I did is writing for Guide Magazine. The kids knew me on Guide Magazine. And it was funny because he was trying to come up with a name for my character. And he's like, what are we going to call you? What are we going to call you? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm, Rich. And he's like, oh no, we got to come up with a sillier name for you. And Randy, kindred spirit, because he's very similar to me, where he's a little bit silly, thinking way outside the box and super creative for the young kids and stuff. So he's like, we'll call you the Mud Guy, which is funny because people forever have called me, the Mud Guy. And then of course they're like, why do we call you the Mud Guy? I was like, it's because there was a column in Guide Magazine called Mud for like 15 years that I did. And that was the very first thing that I did. Started writing for Guide Magazine. And then I got home and I started writing for other Christian magazines as well. And the next thing that happened, and part of this actually started at that same ASI meeting, one of the people that I met actually gave us a little grant. And they're like, this is cool. And the idea was that we would start doing live events somehow. Because I was already kind of in the event space. And so that also kind of launched another big part of our ministry that is still very big till this day, which is our events side of our ministry, where we would literally go places. And you mentioned earlier that you were one of the very, very first churches and pastors that invited me to come bring an event to your church when you were down in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And, we would bring these 3 event weekends, Friday night, Sabbath morning, Saturday night. And do this big blowout thing for kids. And at that time, we were kind of teaching a lot on the creation, evolution topic and dinosaurs, the flood and all these things. And that's kind of the beginning of how the ball started rolling. And of course, I fully let go of the architecture thing and I started doing ministry. And it was terrifying at the beginning.
Sure.
Because you're still trying to, we had kids by that time and we're, needing to support them. So it was pretty scary.
Rich, thank you for sharing. And again, I've said this a million times. I'll say it again. I always love to ask the question about people's faith journey, their call to their specific ministry, because I could only assume, because I've never been in that specific position of being in a certain career full time and then jumping into something as ministry and the way that you're doing it and living that career, which, had some financial stability, obviously, right? And then now you're coming into this, like you said, you stepped through the door. I mean, you were talking to God and God said, okay, it seems like God took you up on that, right? And he's smiling because it took a little while, but then you went through that door. And as you took that step, it seems just like not only the door opened, but everything else, right? The flood gates began to come in of how God was leading and guiding you and helping you through that process to continue to grow. And just for those that are listening, when Rich comes to do his dinosaur encounter, what it's called now, I'm not sure what it was called then. Maybe it was the same, but was it called the same or was it something else?
It's gone through a few different names. Like the whole weekend package used to have a different name and stuff. But the last several years, it's Dinosaur Encounter.
But I remember Rich telling me, this is a true story. He gave spray bottles with water and he says, here. And he says, this is in the sanctuary. And we're both smiling and laughing here. He says, grab some of your young people. I don't know that this is something you still do, and he says, go around the church. And at one part in the scene with the lights off, just spray gently around in the air. And so we did this, and it was kind of shocking. People were looking around, who's spraying us, but it certainly brought the effect. So this is the creativity. We were careful to make sure that we sprayed gently water on certain folks that wouldn't get mad and on people's hair and things of that nature. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that right now to anybody, but I'm just saying this is, I guess the relationship was there, which was like, hey, let's do this. But Dinosaur Encounter, as it is known now, is something that you've now done, my goodness, all over the U.S. and beyond, right? It's something that God has really blessed you, and people, kids, adults, I mean, everybody has been blessed that has seen this. For those that have never been to one, then at the end of our conversation, you're going to give all your information and people can get a hold of you. But on the One Mustard Seed website, you say it's pretty simple. We love to point kids and families to Jesus. And we've been unpacking that just a bit here, but possibly tell us what other ministries now are part of One Mustard Seed and some of the testimonies over the years now of how not only kids have been blessed, but people of all ages as well.
Mm-hmm. So for sure, as you hinted there, the events side of it is one of the areas that really we've been able to grow a lot. We started off by doing these church visits and then graduated to doing tours where we would go to regions of the country at a time and do a bunch of events at a time, as well as different countries. We've probably done Dinosaur Encounter in a half a dozen countries, in Spanish as well. And right now we're getting ready. Here in a couple of weeks, I'll be heading to do 7 cities in Texas. And then later here, a couple of months from now, we'll be heading to Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa. So we do these tours, 8 cities at a time, 10 cities at a time, 6 cities at a time. We've done this show in at least, and I probably should track this, but I know it's at least 150 cities just in the United States as we tour that around. So that is kind of one of our ongoing big ministries.
And for those that may not know, and I mean, the title gives it away to some degree, but maybe tell them or tell us a little bit about what Dinosaur Encounter actually is about.
Yeah. So, and if they want to check out the website directly, it's dinoencounter.com.
Yeah.
Basically, it's about a 75-minute stage show that we tour. So we come with our trailer and we set up this huge scene with lights and smoke machines and all sorts of props and this humongous screen. And basically, our entire objective in this ministry is to help folks understand dinosaurs from a biblical point of view. Because sadly, when we were looking for different areas to work in, we noticed that there was a lot of confusion on the dinosaur issue within the church with kids and adults, because it's not really been one of these topics that's been talked about a lot in church. And when I was a kid, it was almost like a taboo subject. I asked somebody about dinosaurs, like, shh, no, we don't talk about dinosaurs. It's because they didn't know what to say. But it's kind of cool. A lot of research has been done. Scientists have been coming forward, Christian scientists, even within the church with the geoscience guys. I mean, just so much research and information has been coming out. The problem is maybe it's not getting effectively to some of the people in the church that need it, specifically the kids, because as most people would know, kids love dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And everywhere they look, it's dinosaurs and dinosaurs all over the place. but pretty much everything they see relating to dinosaurs is a direct attack on the Bible and a direct attack on God and millions of years, and they evolved and there's no God and all this stuff. And it's kind of funny. I've been to church events where I'm the speaker and I'll ask the kids, when did God create everything? And they're like, thousands of years ago. And then I'll ask literally in the next breath, when did dinosaurs live? Millions of years ago. And I'm like, all right, kids, they're not even understanding that there's a conflict there, that what they just said doesn't even make sense, that they can say that God created all of life thousands of years ago, but then in the same breath say that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, because they're literally brainwashed, indoctrinated to only hear one side of that argument. And it is a very anti-God, anti-biblical point of view. So this particular branch of our ministry work was to help in that area. So our event is to talk about all the scientific, nature, Bible evidence, literature, history. There's so much evidence available. And of course, then package it up in a way that's kind of fun and engaging for kids and families to watch together. And the cool thing is, we also, teach the Pathfinder and Adventure honor inside the event. So when the clubs come, we also give them their little patch for free for their sash. Yeah.
And of course, you're going to be up there to Gillette, correct?
That's right. I will be there also teaching the dinosaur honor here in August. So look forward to being there and getting people excited about learning about how dinosaurs fit into the biblical worldview.
Awesome. So again, people have responded of all ages, just in a very, very positive way. What's some of the most, for lack of a word, coolest response that you've had from children specifically, right? Once they've seen this, heard this, learned this, and the parents as well. What are some of the testimonies, I guess, if we want to use that word as well, after all these years? Because now you've been doing this for about 15 years. I remember, again, being the first one to now, it's been about 15 plus years, and you've evolved, and I've seen it again. You came to another church as well. When I was pastoring here in Florida, you came to that one, and everybody loved it. And so now you have done it so many times. What has been the response, specifically from the kids, right?
Yeah, for sure. The one most common response and comment that I get is people coming up to me saying, thank you, because I have had this question for decades. Of course, that's parents talking. And then also for their kids, because their kids would ask them these questions and they have no idea how to respond. And they're like, finally, what a relief, because I can talk to them about tons of other Bible questions and topics, but every time this one comes up, I've got nothing. And now I've got something. And now even my kids, got something they understood because they were there, and we could have this discussion openly and talk about it and look at the evidence. So for me, that part's been a huge blessing, having so many parents and kids come up to me and they're just like, finally, thank you. Somebody could help us understand how this works, because they hear such a one-sided thing in our culture that unfortunately nobody is really going out of their way to teach the church side of things, like in that topic.
That's awesome. So Rich, along with Dinosaur Encounter, writing, publishing, you also do a week of prayer, but you've also done movies. And recently you put out, people can go, and again, all of this information would be on our show notes, but you have AdventistMovie.com there, where now you're showing your, can I say newest movie? Because you had one before, if I'm not mistaken, but the one you have now, you can talk to us about both. The one you have now is called The Secret of the Fossil. I was able to see it. Thank you for that. And this is a whole nother dimension, right? One thing is to do dinosaur encounter at churches and at gyms, wherever it is that you do them live on the stage there. But then doing a movie, right? Writing it, producing it, filming it. So tell us how you got into that area, what that's been like, and the feedback to these two movies, and then the one that you're promoting now as well, and how people can also sign up.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, rewinding towards the beginning of what we were doing, I started writing for Guide. I started also doing these events, and all along, our walk, it was always like, all right, God, what else do you want me to do? Just keep opening the doors. I'll keep walking through them. And the idea came to move into the video space. At that time, video was starting to become a lot more technologically available to produce. It was easier with computers, cameras, and the whole thing. So I was like, all right, how can I maybe plug in some of my creative energy into the video space? Because as we did the events and stuff, I came to this realization that there was only a certain amount of people I can reach going around doing live events. And I should tell you, it was starting to get exhausting because I was traveling. It's two times a month, sometimes even 3 times a month. And it was getting a little heavy. And so the idea came, was like, hey, why don't we also start producing video? And that's what we started doing. We started producing video. One of the very first large projects that we tackled was this series called The Creation Case, which I know a lot of your listeners have probably heard of. It's been out now for almost 10 years, but it was kind of a groundbreaking approach to video because I wanted to do something teaching on the creation evolution topic, but something that was just unheard of. Even in the secular world, it was unheard of at the time and I went and pitched this to the General Conference Children's Ministries Department, who the director was Linda Coe at the time. And I said, hey, I want to produce a video series, but this is not talking heads. This is not studio work. This is 100% shot on location at some of the most profound, just mind-blowing locations as we look for evidence and clues of creation in all these places, like Grand Canyon. We were going to climb volcanoes. We were going in caves. We were in the ocean. We were, trekking through deserts. I mean, it was just insane, the idea of going to these places. And, they were able to give us some of the funding that we needed. And so we pulled the trigger and we went ahead and produced this. And this one series has been a huge part of our reach because it's had just incredible global reach, millions of views, tons of people coming up to me. Wow, Rich, we needed this desperately. We love this. We literally shot in over 1,000 locations.
Wow.
And people don't understand how much traveling it took to do that. And that most people nowadays, even in the regular secular world, are not willing to or able to travel that much to shoot at that many locations for a 13 episode series. So that was kind of our first foray into the world of video production, which then evolved into producing more programs, more videos. We started, doing stuff for Hope Channel and 3ABN in the children's, programming area, several shows in those areas. We started producing video for the VBS work that the church would also do. They always have like a open and close for each day of the week. We started doing those, and I've still been doing those. As a matter of fact, we literally last week shot some scenes. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell where it was, but this is for 2025's VBS, and it is, I guess the best word is epic. When kids see where we went to shoot this, I think people will be completely blown away that an actual person went to this place to shoot this program for kids. And again, go big or go home. That's kind of my motto here. And we wanted to just do something that's always, every time we do any kind of video, I'm like, how awesome can we make this? Because for God, it's got to be awesome. It's got to be the best that we can do. And so video was kind of what brought us then to the movies space.
Okay. So again, if anybody wants to check out Creation Case, they can go to your website. This will be on the show notes, onemustardseed.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can get a link there, or they can go directly to thecreationcase.com.
Thecreationcase.com. Okay, we'll have that on the show notes. And I've seen some of that. And again, this is just, many people will know this, but for those that don't, this is just incredible, wonderful content for kids and just anybody in general to have some fun watching these wholesome, instructive, Jesus-focused videos. Is that fair to say?
Very much so. Very much so. So action, adventure, but definitely honoring God and giving him all the glory for his creative power.
Amen. And so with that said, you get into the movies. And so tell us a little bit about the first movie and then the current one.
Yeah. So about, I think 5 years ago, I was doing a lot of work for the North America Division Stewardship Department. John Matthews was hiring me to produce a lot of children's content that would teach on stewardship, which I thought was brilliant. To not wait till people are adults to talk about stewardship. Start talking to them about that when kids were younger, and of course to give them the full view of stewardship. Because a lot of times when we hear stewardship in a church setting, we're always like, all right, it's tithes and offerings time.
Right.
And most people don't realize that stewardship is much, much more. It's about entrusting God with everything you have, everything you own, right down to your time, your talent, your family, your health, everything, the environment. It's all about being good stewards of all these things that God has given us. And so, I had been producing a bunch of different content for him. And then we kind of had this idea of creating a series of shorts that would tell short stories, short stewardship stories. And then I told John, I was like, hey, what if we actually, instead of, producing 10 or 15 of these shorts, why don't we just do one long movie? And it's kind of funny because I was already on this 2 or 3 year journey where I was in the back of my head, I'm like noticing that in the church setting, hey, truth be told, we really are not in the movie space. And I realized that movies are huge everywhere else. In the culture, in our society, movies are huge. People don't realize this. We're talking about 1.6 billion tickets are sold every single year here in North America of people that go see a movie, and we're not in that space. And I'm like, okay. So I'd been thinking about it, praying about it, and I kind of pitched the idea to John. I was like, hey, what do you think if we just, combine this all into one big, long story that teaches stewardship? And he loved the idea. So we went ahead, got a little bit of funding from them to get this thing produced. And we produced our first movie, which was called The Mysterious Note. And great reception. Again, mind-blowing how God can use this movie. Again, millions of views. I think last time I checked, we're pushing 20 million views, which shocked me that God can use a humble little story to reach so many people around the world. So that was our first time that we did a movie.
Yeah. So you did The Mysterious Note. Incredible feedback in the sense of how many people have been watching and continue to watch at different levels. And again, for those that have never seen it, go to onemustardseed.com and you can get all of this there. And you have links to the creation case and the movie that we just mentioned. And so you went from there and then you did this one now that's been out for a bit. I have to say that was probably a whole nother aspect there. I appreciate the opening scene. I'm not going to tell anybody that hasn't seen the movie. That was a fun little opening scene because I'm assuming, Rich, and I have to believe that even though now you've gathered a lot of experience doing this, even with the current movie that you wrote and produced, you're still learning this space, right? You're still learning how to make a movie in and of itself. So maybe tell us a little bit about that for those listening that are interested on that end, but then also tell us obviously about the movie itself.
Yeah. So, as you can imagine, when we finally pulled the trigger on producing The Mysterious Note, although I did have some video production experience,
sure.
A movie is a completely different beast.
Yeah.
So there was a lot that I had to learn. And probably the one thing that in my head was the bottleneck, because I, like I said, been thinking about this for the longest time, but I was like, I can't do anything unless the story is great. The story has to be great.
Content is king.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're not telling an engaging enough story, I'm like, you're not going anywhere. So, when I started writing The Mysterious Note, I had never produced a movie before. So right away, I bought like 3 or 4 books on screenplay writing. Because I'm like, all right, I need to know how to write a story, how to tell a story in a movie space setting. And that's exactly what I did. And I got these books and I read them 2, 3, 4 times each. And then finally, when the moment came to start writing, I sat down and wrote this whole story out. And as you mentioned a moment ago, the amount of knowledge gained comes from the experience of having actually done it. And, the next thing to do is to build on it. And that was a lot of pressure that I put on myself after that movie, because as you can probably imagine, after we did The Mysterious Note, I got endless questions of, are you doing another movie? We love The Mysterious Note. Can you do another movie? When are you going to do another movie? And I was like, oh, okay. And I started realizing, I'm like, okay, it's true. When you've done a first movie, you're so much farther along with what you've learned, that you're so much more equipped to consider producing a second movie. And of course that, you're pyramiding and building and getting higher, and that sets you up to do a third one and whatever. This time around, I did not have the NAD support, and we decided as a ministry that we would tackle this project on our own. And that's what we did. And of course, I sat around for literally a couple of years. I'm like, until I have an idea of a story, I can't go. And the way that I work, at least, is I rummage around in my head. I don't really write things down until I have ideas. And so finally, that lightning bolt came. And it was two things. It was, I needed to understand how the story was going to look, and I also needed to understand how we were going to distribute this. Because, when you don't have a sponsor anymore, distribution suddenly becomes a much bigger factor, because you're hoping that you'll get some kind of financial support on the back end from all the expense of having to make the movie on the front end.
Right.
And so I came up with this model that I thought would work, which was to serve the church. One realization that we discovered when we did the Mysterious Note is so many churches out there used to have movie nights all the time. Movie nights was like a big deal. And it was a fun social event. You pull out the popcorn and the chairs and the projector, and somebody's got to, the search committee's got to figure out which movie to show. And I don't know what happened, but in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years or whatever, suddenly just picking the movie has become a major problem, because pretty much none of the secular movies now work. I'm not trying to throw shade on Disney, but nobody's going to show a Disney movie anymore at a church event. And I even was getting a lot of commentary from people saying even the Christian movies we can't really show, because although it's exciting that the Christian movie space is growing, the commentary was that they're all very dramatic. They're PG-13, and now even rated R. The themes are extremely heavy, extremely dramatic. There's always somebody dying. Somebody's always got cancer. Some major trauma is happening always in most of the Christian movies. And I was, as an advocate for kids, I'm like, why isn't anybody producing Christian movies that target kids, that are serving kids, that are for families, that families can watch together, that churches could use as a movie night? None of these things. Nobody's making these movies. And so with lots of prayer, and I'm like, is God needing me to kind of try to figure out how to serve that space where we can serve on a more social setting? Because here's the reality that I think most pastors know, and hopefully know, is that church is not just about showing up for Sabbath worship. It's not just the worship experience. It's also the fellowship experience. It's about being together as a unit, as a family, as a church family. And that means you need to be able to provide moments for them to do fun things and different things. And of course, like I said, in the past, where we would have churches doing movie nights, that was a great and fun thing that would happen. But that has kind of been lost because the availability of movies appropriate for this kind of a program has lost its way.
And particularly for kids, as you mentioned, right?
Exactly. Yep. Because even though a lot of these Christian movies out there, I'm not trying to throw shade on them either. A lot of these movies are appropriate enough, maybe, for kids, some of them. They're still not really necessarily made for kids, which I was trying to bridge that a little bit tighter. Made for kids, but also made for adults and made for everybody. Rated G. And for the people that have already seen The Secret of the Fossil and The Mysterious Note, and a lot of people don't even realize this, but I actually even intentionally write my stories with no bad guys. There's no bad guys. I do that on purpose, because movies, and you read these screenplay books and whatever, and it's all about conflict. You have to get the conflict and develop the conflict, and then your story gets carried through conflict. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to go against that a little bit, because I had a different philosophy on storytelling. My storytelling is about situations or circumstances of things that happened to people that provided an opening to teach a lesson. And so I don't want to have bad guys. I don't want to have conflict and people, yelling at each other and inappropriate stuff or language or, innuendos or nothing like that. It's just a fun, adventurous story about something that happened to some regular people that provided for a moment of learning. So little things like that. I was trying to figure out how to do what I felt the calling was needed for movies that I think would be enjoyed in a church space where they can have a movie night. So when it came to the whole distribution thing, I was like, hey, why don't we see if we can get churches, Pathfinder clubs, schools, they can have a movie night. We'll make a movie. They have a movie night. We just ask them basically for a small donation, and we make the movie available to them to show in their setting. And we even go the extra mile because we tell them, hey, if you guys want to actually use it as a fundraiser for your Pathfinder club, for your school, for a mission trip, that's fine with us. You don't owe us anything. 100% of what you sell, 100% of what you ticket sales, popcorn, pizza, whatever, that's for you guys. We're just asking for that small donation that helps us. And 100% of what you keep, what you make is for you to keep. We even extend our ticketing platform to them, so that they don't even have to pay all these exorbitant ticketing fees. We'll just let them use our ticketing platform if you want to sell tickets, and just provide us like your PayPal email, whatever, or the church or somebody in your church, and all that just goes straight to you guys. We just want to help facilitate a fun social fellowship night for families, for kids to come together. It's a simple ministry. Yes, it's not, morning worship or whatever, but it is what we believe to be a big, important part of how churches can function and to help them on that, fellowship space to be able to get together and to gather. Literally last night we did the movie locally here for the first time in Berrien Springs, and it was just a blast to see a couple hundred people come together. The Pathfinder clubs were sponsoring it. They're selling tickets, selling food. And it was just so much fun to see people just gathering, having a great time after the movie as well, before the movie, just talking and catching up. And I was like, it was like a reminder to me. I'm like, that's why I'm doing this. It's the story also, of course, has a very important spiritual component. So besides the fellowship and all that, I take advantage of the story to make some very deep spiritual points as well. Yeah. So that's kind of the package of what we're trying to do.
Wonderful. Well, again, if people are interested, and it'll be in the show notes, AdventistMovies.com, and you can get all the information there. I highly encourage that if there's any church, hey, again, as Rich just mentioned, and you want to raise some funds for Gillette or anything else, definitely check out this movie. I think you guys will be blessed and have that fun as well.
And if I can throw in there as Please. Well, we're still trying to figure out the format itself to be able to perpetuate this. Because people are already asking us, are you going to do another movie? And, when I make the pitch on AdventistMovies.com, it's twofold. We're looking for, I'm calling them premier partners. So what we'd like to do is build an army of churches across the division, across the world, that would be able to say, hey, Rich, when you come out with your next movie or this particular movie, we want to premiere it at our church. We don't want to premiere it in theaters. We want to drive people to church, not to go to some other place. We want to bring families and people to church. It could be an evangelistic opportunity as well. Bring your friends, because the reality is everybody loves a movie.
Yeah.
So it's a great opportunity, not for your own church, but also to make a connection with your community. Bring a friend, because it's just easier to bring a friend to a movie than it is to church. Sorry to say, but that's just kind of how it is. So if you're looking for an introductory way to bring somebody in, hey, have a movie night. Popcorn, it's easy. It's not abrasive. Nobody's going to, hit you over the head with a Bible or anything.
Right.
And you have a fun time. So one of the things that we're doing is looking for churches and schools, any organization to be our premier partners. So that means sign up for the future or to sign up now. Show the movie now. We literally just released 2 months ago. So it's still just out being released now, and a lot of places still being shown for the first time. And the other thing is we are organized as a nonprofit. So if there are people out there that see our vision and see how we can use movies to connect with people in a way that is not possible in other parts of the church work, we are needing help and we're needing supporters, because if it's one thing that should be obvious is that we want to continue to do this. And we want to continue to grow. We want to make the stories better. We want to have better tech, better everything so that our movies can continue to grow and improve and be better every single time. So we're always looking for media partners.
Yeah.
And I get it, because not a lot of people see movies as, I get it. They'd rather give to an orphanage or whatever. And those are wonderful causes. But maybe there are people out there that say, hey, there are people here in our own country that we cannot reach. But maybe with a movie, we can reach them. We can bring them in and have this as being that starting point that we can talk about. So for those people that might be a little bit more forward thinking that way and say, hey, yeah, movies are, our church is not in the movie space. Maybe we can support and help, our Adventist movies production to make more movies, to make movies that are available to all ages, all people, fun, adventurous. Like I said, rated G, no bad guys. If they want to support, same thing at the AdventistMovies.com page is a link there that they can get on board and help us.
Yeah. Again, I hope people go and check it out. I appreciate you sending me the link so that I can view it. My wife and I saw it. We loved it. And you alluded to it just a moment ago as you were talking. I think people also have to understand, obviously, is that you are continuing to increase the production, right? This is not a huge, obvious Hollywood production with all the bells and whistles, but it is something that you can continue to build on. It is well done overall. The storyline is clear. And I just want to applaud you for being in this space and continuing to every time get better, just like anybody else would in any other lane. And the fact that you are focusing on people of all ages, but the reality is you're also focused on specifically kids. And so I love that. And I just encourage people to go and check it out, AdventistMovies.com, however the Lord leads them to help and be one of those partners as well. Rich, shifting gears just a little bit now. So you've done movies, these dinosaur encounters that you continue to do all over. You're going to be in Texas and then some, all the writing you've done, 15 plus years of children's ministry and counting. What are some of the best practices now that you would suggest, right, for the local church children's ministry, or just for parents in general in their home, right? So two different venues here, the church and the home. What are some of the best ways, suggestions that you would give to help empower their kids in the ways of Jesus in today's hyper digital iPad, iPhone, whatever it may be, world that we live in today?
Yeah. And we kind of hinted at it earlier, at least on the church side, about creating opportunities where kids can engage, be involved, participate. One of the things that I didn't quite mention is that along with our children's church stuff, eventually we also started looking for opportunities to get the kids to then also be the ones serving. So we would create opportunities to go into our community and have them be hands-on doing simple stuff. So it's also about trying to find simple enough things that kids can do. And yeah, they may not be profoundly meaningful. They didn't like build a fence or whatever, but they were there picking up trash or, making some sort of a gesture of, hey, we're using our time and our energy. We're going to block these 2 hours to go and serve in the community. And getting kids to do that is huge. Be involved in what they believe, not just believe. They got to have an action component to it. So any opportunity the church can create to get the kids outside of the church, to get them outside of the listen only, look only perspective and point of view is going to be huge, I believe. Getting them out of their seats. It's interesting. I've done a bunch of like seminars for kids and whatnot. And a lot of times, when we talk about our Sabbath school class, I talked about this a little bit earlier, why we feel like we had such a great success rate with our kids. There's one interesting philosophy that I'll share, that I thought was a huge impact with what we were doing at our church. And that was, as Sabbath school teachers, we had this, policy where, we decided as teachers, there was 3 of us, we decided that for every hour of Sabbath school, we're going to spend 1 hour of time with these kids outside of the church environment. So, whether it's going out playing go bowling, or bring them to our house for, pizza and games, or we're going to go rake at the neighbor's yard, or, we're going to go on a walk, to the beach, or, whatever. We were going to spend 1 hour every single time that we had 1 hour in Sabbath school. And the way that we basically worked that out is, okay, any given month, there's 4 weeks of Sabbath school. So that's 4 hours. So every month, our job was to find 4 hours that we could spend with these kids outside of Sabbath school, outside of the church, engaging with them, connecting with them, building friendships with them, building trust with them, getting them to the point where they can, ask questions, or, talk about deeper topics and stuff like that. We feel like, at least in the church setting, that one aspect was huge, because if it's just you're teaching in the Sabbath school, there's really no opportunity to engage and connect, as you're just kind of teaching, you're leading out with songs and whatever. So we were we created this policy, and we believe that was a huge factor. So if I can encourage churches to think about one idea, it was that one, which really facilitated to be able to make a connection with these kids that we only get to see that period of time. Now on the home front, that's totally different, because now you're talking about parents who are responsible for ministering to their kids. And this is an area that is completely different to the church space. At home, and it's sad, sometimes parents obviously get busy, and work and activities and violin class and sports and whatever they're involved in. And sometimes spiritual matters take a back seat. Really, really, really want to encourage parents to look at the position that spiritual matters is in the home. Is it the eighth thing that you do, or is it the first thing that you do? And it can be little simple things. It doesn't have to be major, huge things, but consistency is probably the hugest thing. Every single day, have that moment, whether it's a little worship in the moment, or you're listening to a podcast on the way to school, you read a book that creates opportunities for discussion, going out and doing mission work. At our church, we were involved in organizing mission trips like most churches do. We went out of our way to create mission trips that kids could go on. That was targeting families. And we'd do these trips to Honduras and whatever. And we had tons of kids, and we were there making the kids work and move things around and do things. Locally here, we would, at home, Christmas Day, we'd open up our gifts and stuff like that. But then after Christmas was over, we'd go out and take presents to the local, to children's homes and to the orphanages and to some foster care people. You got to make that extra step, and it has to be intentional, because it's not going to happen on its own. And it's the responsibility of the parent. It's not the pastor's responsibility. It's not the kid's responsibility. It's not the teacher's responsibility. The buck has to stop at the parent. So they have to place this at a high enough importance and priority to say, all right, I have to do this. I have to get this idea in place, and we have to organize where we're going to go. We have to see what content or books or podcasts or whatever is available. And that's another big part of what we do, is to help parents by creating resources for them. And, I mentioned the creation case earlier. We also have a weekly podcast that we produce called God's Great Earth. That's there for people to be able to listen to on the way to school, on the way to work. We have an entire publishing branch of work that we do. We're putting out 3-4 books a year, all of them spiritual, exciting, colorful, creative stories and religious content, spiritual content, so that we can create these materials that parents can get for their kids. Because if you let it just happen on its own, they're going to watch whatever. They're going to watch YouTube. They're going to watch, all these other things. And hey, it's no secret here. None of that content is giving glory to God. None of that is honoring God. So if you want your kids to be impassioned about God, you have to provide the content and the alternative materials that will point them to God. So that's another part of what we do, is creating this content that can be available for parents and say, hey, yeah, and I get it. Sometimes people say, the church content just isn't as good. And yeah, it's true. How can we compete with Hollywood and millions of dollars of budget?
Right.
So our goal has been to try to say, hey, we do want to create pretty cool stuff, really creative stuff, really amazing stuff, whether it's books or podcasts or TV shows. So that is also a part of what we want to do to help parents fulfill that ultimate responsibility they have to raise spiritual champions.
I appreciate that, Rich. Thank you overall for your time. Thank you for how the Lord has led you, and you've obeyed the calling of God in your heart, in your life. And thank you for speaking here these words as well. And I think part of what I hear, just in a short summary of what you just said, is a lot of intentionality in the Sabbath school, not only to be there, that's a pretty good challenge as well, that for every hour be 1 hour outside, or create that space in some shape or form for local Sabbath school teachers. And in today's hectic world, that is certainly a challenge, or at least something for people to consider, local churches that will look different in different places, but also the challenge for the home. And again, the intentionality that within each home, making the decision just to make sure that you put the time in with your children to have those moments where you're talking and telling and listening to them about Jesus. Is that fair to say?
Very much so. Very much so. It's just creating those opportunities to have the one-on-one. And parents already know that,
Sure.
Spend as much possible time with your kids, but also make that time count by having it be high quality with what you're talking about. Not just, it's cool to go out fishing or whatever, but then have these moments where you give the kids opportunities to ask the hard questions. We want them to ask the hard questions. Sometimes parents want to avoid the hard questions. No, it's the other way around. We want them to ask the hard questions. We want what's on their heart to come forward so that we can help them get through it. Because kids nowadays, it's rough. It's hard being a kid today.
Yeah.
So we need to be there for them. And the front line is our parents.
Thank you, Rich. Before I let you go, just one or two last quick questions. And I've brought this back. I used to do this several years ago, sometimes ask a fun type of question, if I can say it that way. With that said, Rich, what is the best advice you've ever gotten and why? And if you have more than one, feel free to share more than one.
Yeah, I'd say early on in my ministry work, when we were trying to get this thing going, I had 2 or 3 friends that would give me advice, because call it advice, call it counseling, call it therapy, whatever you want to call it, because there was some bumpy years there. And I remember one of the conversations that I had was a friend of mine that I knew since we were like late teens. And a lot of people out there know Jamie George, a violin player. And, he has had his ministry going for years and years. And I was starting my ministry, and we'd get on the phone and he'd give me, thoughts and advice and think about this and think about that. And at this point, I was also starting to travel around more, which is a lot of what he does. And he gave me this really great advice, which was, and I kind of hinted at it earlier in our show here, which was the part about creating content, repeating yourself. Because, as I was going around doing events, if I just go around to do events and that's the only way for people to be able to hear what I'm doing or hear what I'm saying, he challenged me to start figuring out how to use technology to perpetuate myself as much as possible, so that people in much farther corners of the world would also have access to the learning, to the knowledge, to the material, to the, excitement of what we do. And that was a really huge piece of advice, because that is what kind of blew open the whole idea of starting to do shows, TV shows, radio shows, books, because I was able to then reach so many more people that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to reach if I just stuck with doing events alone. I do value that advice that I got. And I know that a lot of the young people that may be listening today are like, and I hear this a lot, I want to grow up and be a content creator. And it's an interesting career choice, and it definitely goes with the culture of today. Of course, I do want to make sure I challenge the kids and anybody listening. Yeah, content creation is an interesting field, highs and lows, but it is an amazing way to reach out to the culture. And I definitely want to encourage any content creators out there that are thinking, what can I do in my little corner, in my little space to reach where I'm going to reach? And a lot of people are like, no, I got to have millions of views. I'm like, you don't have to start with millions of views. You can start with your own little corner of the world, because at the end of the day, God's tasked us to reach the people that are around us first. Yeah. So even if it's just a few dozen people or whatever, start there and let God grow it. So that kind of advice to me was good, and I'd love to share it with your viewers as well.
We appreciate that, Rich. Again, I appreciate your time, and just how God has led you, and having known you and been at the start, if I can say it that way, of your ministry, and seeing how God has just blessed you and how you have blessed so many people, including myself, along the way. I just want to say thank you. Before I let you go, any last thoughts? Anything else you want to put out there?
Yeah, I was reminiscing on the various ministry areas that we have worked in, and there was one more that I thought I'd share with your listeners in case that could be a blessing for them. We noticed several years ago that there was a need in our schools for week of prayer content. A lot of the schools were struggling with this, and we realized during the COVID era that it became more and more acceptable to create virtual content. And so I had heard from tons of schools that are like, we've had the same retired pastor come several times over the years to talk to the kids. We can't afford, to bring in speakers that would be super meaningful and powerful to the kids. They had asked me if I could produce that content, and that's actually what we've done. We've created a resource, which is called weekofprayeronline.com. And we produce a series every single year, a 5-part series, so that schools can use Monday through Friday. And they can have me do their virtual speaker. So the kids and the school still put on the music and the prayers, and I provide them a daily prayer point and a prayer group that we're trying to pray for. And then I tell some stories. We have some puppets. It's a lot of fun. It's humorous. I tell usually a 5-part to be continued type story. And of course, always bringing home the spiritual and meaningful points in each episode. So that's another resource out there that we created again when we noticed a hole in the schools, particularly those small and medium schools, that they can have some sort of an alternative option, since most of the schools are doing Week of Prayer twice a year. So just wanted to share that one as well.
Thank you for sharing. People can find all of these links on the show notes. Particularly, make sure you check out onemustardseed.com and adventistmovies.com. Rich, may God continue to bless you, your family, and your ministry. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Javi. Appreciate being on the show, and look forward to being again sometime on the future.
Absolutely. I will say I had fun talking with Rich. It was a wonderful conversation, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well, and that it was a blessing and perhaps a challenge to you. Rich, thank you for your time and all you have and will continue to do to help kids and families follow Jesus. Make sure to check out onemustardseed.com and all the other links that are on the show notes. And as I also mentioned in the intro, I hope you go to adventistmovies.com and sign up to watch his latest movie, The Secret of the Fossil, at your church. Once again, thank you for listening and sharing the Restored podcast. Until next time, God bless.
Thank you for listening to this Restore podcast. We hope you've been blessed. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our inspiring episodes.